I really appreciate your time and your interest. I will be talking about security culture, or how to build your human firewall or human-centric defenses. That's something that is quite close to my heart. I've been, in fact, my background is in information security. I've worked there for about 20 years, and then founded a company called Popcorn Training, where what we did was just focus on creating content to help end users become more cyber savvy. And since 2018, we've become part of the KnowBe4 family. KnowBe4 is an American-based leader in the security culture and awareness space, but we do retain our African presence through the South Africa Popcorn acquisition. So we have our own team here. We've got our own content development team, and that allows us to create content that is specifically built for the African audience. So what I'm going to talk to you about, I think I have about 30 minutes, and there'll be time for some questions, I believe, is I will share some research data that we've conducted on the state of cybersecurity culture on the continent, and then what it means to change the culture, as well as some tips on how you can build your human firewall within your organization. So because I'm going to share research reports, there'll be quite a few graphs, but yeah, bear with me. Usually they help tell the story. So Forrester Consulting, it's about over a year ago, they've conducted a survey across 780 plus security professionals, and it was all about whether they feel that security culture is an important aspect. And the response was quite positive. So more than 90% said no, it's actually really important to have and build a security culture in your organization, not just from a risk management point of view, but from an overall business continuity and sort of business enabling factor. So that's a good thing. But then in the same survey, they asked those professionals, and bear in mind those are security professionals, what they understand when they talk about security culture. And out of those 780 participants, they got 759 different responses in terms of how do we define security culture. And I mean, roughly those could be sort of segmented into compliance to policy or awareness, also that security is everyone's responsibility. But it's just interesting to note that even within our own industry, like the cybersecurity, risk management, CISOs, etc., that we don't have a consistent understanding or definition for security culture. And that's where this group of researchers comes in. They're called Culture from Norway. And what they've done is they worked with a professor in sociology, and they looked at, because in the social sciences, we've been measuring and managing organizational culture for more than 30 years. So they applied the same methods from a research point of view to security culture by saying, okay, there are specific categories or dimensions that we can look at and then define and measure and compare amongst different organizations to sort of come up with a maturity level when it relates to security culture. And the dimensions that they've defined or identified are 7, and they range from attitudes, which is really, what do people or end users think about security? Are they positive or negatively, is their attitude positive or negative? What behaviors do they show on a daily basis? For example, do they share their passwords easily? Are they clicking on phishing emails? Cognition refers to the level of knowledge. So the level of awareness really that people have about the importance of security in general. Communication is more around how does the organization communicate security principles? How well is that done? How well is it perceived also by the end users? Compliance is all about your written rules, so policies, standards, procedures, etc. And then norms refers to the rules that are not necessarily written down anywhere, but that people just comply with because it's something that's always been done that way, or that's something that's the culture of the organization sort of asks people to do. And then responsibilities refers to the level of accountability that people take for security. And now the nice thing is, now that we have these 7 dimensions that can be, through survey techniques, they can be measured, we have a way of comparing organizations, or even within a group of companies, let's say, or different departments, you can then compare the level of security culture against other groups. And the way that can be done is by obviously diving into those 7 dimensions and then giving, depending on the responses that the users give us, we can then assign a score or an index that goes from poor all the way up to excellent. And what this type of sort of more academic or scientific measurement allows culture to do, this group of researchers, is that every year they publish a report that compares different industries, or benchmarks different industries and their security cultures against each other. And the 2021 report was just recently released, I think in April. And you're welcome to, reach out to me, and I'll send you the link. We can maybe put that in the chat, the link to the latest report. In summary, what is quite interesting, and I'll show you the details just now in terms of the industries, but globally, no industry has a good security culture, let alone excellent security culture. So on a global scale, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to improve in those 7 dimensions across the globe. Also, very little change. You would have thought that, with COVID and people working from home, and the media coverage that was achieved, and all the breaches, etc., that there's an improvement in the security culture, but it hasn't been. It's not visible, at least in the data. And then something that's quite concerning is that the educational sector has been very poor in the previous culture reports. They have improved a little bit, but they're still quite poor. If you look at that, here's the details of the different industries. No surprise, obviously, financial services, banking, they're sort of in the high performing sectors. But even they are not good or excellent. They're like in the moderate sort of sphere. And then at the bottom of the performing industries, you see that education and construction, also government and energy utilities, those are sort of your poorer performers. And when it comes to cognition, which really refers to knowledge and learning, the education sector scored the worst. And I think that is something that I always say in my talks, is something that we have to change, because like cybersecurity awareness is no longer a technical skill, it's a life skill. And if we consider the new generation being prepared in the educational institutions, whether that's high schools or tertiary institutions, that's where we really need to make sure that this understanding of critical thought and how to use the internet safely, and what the impact of cybercrime could be, that should be part of your life curriculum. And unfortunately, that's not happening enough, especially not on the African continent. In fact, we did another survey with April from the Cyber Defense Forum on, across 400 teachers in Africa, and asked them, that was more around how do we, inspire more girls to join the industry. But one of the questions was, how far is cybersecurity covered in various schools? And out of those 400 responses, only 3.7% said that they currently provide cybersecurity as a subject or as part of a subject. So that's not enough, and more needs to be done there. If we look at Africa in comparison to the rest of the world, I think we're sort of pretty much an average. That though is also something, if we consider the data, like the people that participate in these surveys, and I've highlighted here all the African countries that were part of this. You can see that the majority of the respondents are from South Africa, and they are also part of the financial services sector, purely because that's the caliber of customers that KnowBe4 has. So I consider that or I suspect that if we look at this data again in a year from now, where we will have more participants from other A countries as well as B different industries, that score might come down a little bit. Another piece of research that we did, which was quite interesting, is we call it the What Keeps You Up at Night study, where we actually speak to security officers and ask them, what are your top concerns? And we did that across 400 organizations on the continent. That was last year. And we also asked them, like, how would you rate your security culture? And out of the respondents, only 34% said that they feel they have a positive culture, whereas the rest of them felt that more work needed to be done. In terms of what CISOs or security professionals on the continent are concerned about, I think that is also in line with the rest of the world. Ransomware is right on top there, malware, phishing, business email compromise, which, by the way, what I find quite interesting is that when we look at the financial impact in terms of cybercrime and fraud, even though ransomware, has increased so much, like in the recent past, and we see all these reports about these $1 million extortions and companies actually paying those amounts. The biggest financial impact still on a global level is not ransomware; it's business email compromise and sort of traditional fraud using emails and sort of social engineering, I suspect. So that's quite interesting. In terms of the initiatives that CISOs or security professionals on the continent are busy with, a positive thing to note is that security awareness training or security culture change is right on top there. Also busy with supply chain security, privileged access management, incident response, the cloud security. Interestingly, that in Nigeria, multi-factor authentication came up on top, but that could have been because this was done in September last year, that possibly through the lockdown happening in Nigeria, that's where a lot of companies sort of, had to like quickly roll out multi-factor authentication, getting their VPNs ready. Another piece of research that is quite interesting if we consider culture and what that really means, or security culture, is an end user survey that we conduct once a year. And this is done across 8 countries and about 800 users. One of the questions that we asked, and this was done late in 2020, is, were you affected by cybercrime while working from home? 24% of the respondents said yes. The other thing that we always ask is sort of, are you confident that you would recognize a security incident? Because that gives us an understanding in terms of how far, like how aware the users are in terms of the things that they don't know, if for lack of a better word. So in 2019, more than half of the respondents said yes, they're very confident that they would recognize a security incident. And in 2020, 40% were still quite confident. Now, I mean, I've been working in security for 20 years, and I would not be confident to spot a security incident. So I think the more you know, the more you understand how little we actually know and how dangerous it is. And it sort of in the same survey, we asked the respondents whether they know what ransomware was, for example. And then 65% in 2019 didn't know what that was, and over half in 2020 also didn't know. And then also some sort of base control like multi-factor authentication, or we call it 2-step verification, so really sort of the commonly known terms. And again, quite a large percentage of the people didn't know what that was, yet they felt they were confident that they would recognize a security incident. So this really is proof that we're dealing with a problem of unconscious incompetence, which is something that I guess is quite difficult to address, because people are oblivious of the fact that they don't know something yet, or they're not aware, or they don't know what they don't know. Something that happened obviously in the beginning of the year, and as a security or privacy professional, I was quite happy to see all the media coverage that we got, and thank you, Mark Zuckerberg or WhatsApp, for all the sort of the hype that it caused, because with their change in data privacy policy, or their planned change, I mean, they've retracted quite a bit of that, but it caused a lot of uproar and sort of social media coverage. And we just thought it would be interesting to hear, again, from the people on the street, like the African people, or at least the people that own smartphones, which is not necessarily the total reflection of the African user, but the smartphone users in these 8 countries. We asked them or surveyed them about what they think about WhatsApp's policy change, and how concerned are they about their privacy rights. And I guess the positive feedback there was that quite a large percentage of the people said they are concerned. In fact, like over a third said they're very concerned about their privacy rights. But then sort of, we said, well, would you move away from WhatsApp because of the concerns? 60% said no, they won't do anything. And then 11% said they would consider moving. 15%, by the way, in South Africa. The majority of the people, and I admit I'm one of those, they sort of are concerned and have installed Signal or some other alternative tool, but still use WhatsApp just because it's so ingrained in everything we do. And to convert our family groups and friend groups and even the work groups to move over to another chat app is not going to happen very easily. So I think that's sort of what we're dealing with, is that even though people might be concerned, they out of convenience or because of it is the tool to use, are still relying heavily on WhatsApp. Also, what was in a way a little bit funny, but it speaks again to the point of the sort of unconscious incompetence, is when we ask people, okay, what alternative messaging tools would you consider using? And then Facebook Messenger and Instagram came up right on top. And that if we consider that people are concerned about their privacy and what WhatsApp is going to do with their data, they shouldn't be using Facebook or Instagram because that's obviously collecting much more information even. So again, I think this just talks to the necessity that we as an industry and government, policy makers, etc., need to work together and do more in a sort of global or general awareness. How can we do that? How do we change security cultures? I think on a public level, it's really important that we all work together, like across public-private sector, that between the financial institutions, the telcos, the governments, the security providers, that we get together and do more initiatives that will help everybody concerned. To give you one example of what we did in South Africa is we initiated something called the GovX Innovation Challenge, where security providers got together to sponsor a sort of hackathon type innovation challenge with the aim to come up with solutions to help our local government to address the cybersecurity challenges we are faced with. Incident response was one of the topics, also online gender-based violence, and we went out to invite the students across all the universities. By the way, it wasn't limited to South Africa, so any African student was allowed to participate, and we had quite significant prizes, 100,000 Rand, which is about $8,000 or $7,000 probably for the first prize, which for our local market or for the student was quite significant. And a lot of industry professionals like CISOs from our local bank, Standard Bank, Old Mutual, like Investec, like a lot of industry experts that came on board and volunteered their time as mentors, as judges. And it was just a really nice little initiative that, got the sort of collaboration between all of these stakeholders together. And I think this is something that we should be doing more of. This is just an example of the winning teams who who I'm hoping, and we're in touch with them still, hoping to see their solutions coming into fruition. So there's one like app that was developed or prototyped that does cybersecurity awareness targeted at children, another one for sort of general citizen awareness, and then a social media plugin to detect gender-based violence related tag words, so or trigger words, and then users can in fact type in their own trigger words and then get those if somebody was messaging or posting on your profile using any of those trigger words, regardless of which language it is. It would then report that as like a violation of the content rules. So overall, I think we had 90 student teams participating. It was a really nice initiative, and it's something I'm hoping we will see more of. We can't just look at government and hope that they will solve the challenge. They have the same problems as we all have, that we don't have enough skills, not enough capacity or budget. So again, it's just it's great to have initiatives like the African Cyber Defense Forum, where we do get together and discuss. But the more we can collaborate and create things such as the GovX initiative and similar initiatives to raise awareness across the youth and help governments, I think, the better the situation. But apart from sort of the general awareness that we should be doing on a public level, I suppose it is, we can also do a lot of, achieve a lot of change and impact if we raise the security culture within our organizations themselves, because the people that move from unconscious incompetence to conscious competence, they take that knowledge and that skill back to their families, back to their homes, hopefully their friends. So that also, if we consider, let's say, for example, a large bank, if they, and I'm just thinking about Standard Bank, for example, in South Africa, they've been doing security culture programs for many, many years. And they've actually launched an internal academy where they allow staff to become sort of security certified. It's called like the Standard Bank Security Academy, where the security team is offering mentoring and guidance through a curriculum. And because they've been doing these security culture and awareness programs for so many years, they had a real interest from more than 1,000 employees across the bank from all different sectors who wanted to upskill themselves and become sort of security professionals. And that's, that's really where I guess we want to be, is to get everyone interested in security, and some of the people maybe even interested enough to upskill themselves. So how do we do that? Obviously, the first thing is to realize awareness, even though it's important, is just sort of the first step, because at the end of the day, we want behavior change. And just because I'm aware of a rule or that something exists doesn't necessarily mean I stick to it or that I care. I always use the example of the road. I might be well aware that there's a 60 zone, but if I don't see a police car or a camera, I might actually drive faster than that. Don't tell anyone, but so that's the reality. So also what doesn't work is if we do an annual awareness session, that's just too little. Also, if we do too much, like if we force our users to watch a monthly security video, that's too much. If we do only sporadic phishing simulations, yes, that gives you some sort of insight, but it isn't enough to change behavior. So what can we do? The first thing to realize is that people do look at generally what their leaders are doing. So getting your execs involved, not just to pay for the provide the budget, but to actually be actively involved and be a spokesperson for your campaign. It's quite powerful. The second tip is, like anything in life, we can't manage if we don't measure it. So use something like the security culture assessment that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, or proficiency assessments that gives you an insight into how good or bad is the level of your current security culture. And then that also allows you to then create a program where you prioritize. If, for example, you identify, hey, my user's attitude towards security is actually really poor, so I need to focus on changing that. And then if you do that on an annual basis, it gives you insight into where you improved upon, and also like a return on investment really in terms of your security culture initiatives. The other thing to realize is that, as a security team or officer, we can't change a whole company's culture. So it's very important to work with your other departments, get your communications and marketing people on board as soon as possible. Also, be wary of the fact that even within the same company, you may have different cultures and different teams. Like, for example, maybe the call center has a different culture to your execs, and they may expect different content as well and different ways of communicating to them. And that's also something to remember, that at the end of the day, if you run a security awareness program or a culture program, that will be the visible face of you and your department to the rest of the company. Like, users won't necessarily know or understand the complexity that that goes into keeping the technology environment safe. They don't know that you spend nights trying to set up the VPN gateway and whatever it might be that the security team is busy with, or doing threat response, etc. They don't see that. But they will see and remember is if you force them to do some boring compliance training program. So it's really important that you keep it engaging, fresh, and sort of professional or humorous if that fits your culture, to make sure that people associate you with high quality. So that also, in terms of the content, people generally are not that interested in anything compliance related. They do, though, worry about, they don't want to be the one responsible for the company being hacked, for example. So people generally want to do the right thing. So if you provide them with the tools and the content on how to do that, they will listen, especially also if you can make it personally relevant. Especially now where we work from home, how to protect your family or your children is something that will be very welcomed by people who have children. I think I mentioned it before, it doesn't work if we just throw too much information at the users. Rather keep it to a few key messages and then repeat those throughout the campaign. At the end of the day, we are human beings and we're only able to change 1 or 2 habits a year. So it's good to focus on whatever is the most crucial and critical from a human risk or human defense point of view that you want to address. At the moment, I reckon it would be, understanding social engineering attacks and spotting those and understanding how to report those. And then also password management, sort of best practices would be another behavior that I would rate very high in terms of priority right now. Sort of how to use multi-factor authentication, for example, and password managers, etc. So those would be my 2 suggestions for a campaign at the moment. Then apart from the content, sort of the training content, it's also really important to combine that with frequent simulation tactics, such as phishing simulations. And when I say frequent, it can't just be once a quarter or once a year. That's not enough, because you really want that experience to be part of your daily life. And to give you an example, in our organization, we get phished every week, and everyone in the company gets a different phishing email. So you can't even ask your colleague to say, oh, did you also get this? And that makes it in a way, it gamifies the experience, because when I know that the IT department is trying to phish me every week, I do look at anything that's incoming, even the stuff that looks like it comes from internal, with much more vigilance. And that's the desired behavior we really want, is that people are not on auto sort of drive and just mindlessly click on stuff, but that's it, that they look at anything that's incoming and verify it before they act on it. What's important when we do the phishing simulation? Well, I mentioned the frequency and to randomize it, but also teaching them, if they do fall for it, teach them how they could have spotted that phishing email and making it easy to report. Again, like in our case, we have like a phish alert button that you can click in your email client that makes it easy. So I don't have to remember an email address where to send it to. And I get immediate feedback. So if this was a simulated phishing attack, immediately I see, hey, well done, this was just a training exercise. And if it was a real phishing email, then I also get feedback relatively quickly from the security team about whether it was, real or not. Another thing, which is an example, any excuse to communicate with your users is a good excuse. So when they fall for that phishing email, you can try and have some fun with it, or obviously show them where they could have spotted that email. The other thing that we often get asked, do incentives work? Like, should we offer prizes, for example, for people that participate? And I think the answer here is it's sort of a yes, maybe, or a combination, like combine positive incentives with negative incentives. I've seen what is quite nice. Some of our customers, they offer bonus payments or bonuses when people don't fall for any phishing simulations over a period of time. So that really rewards desired behavior. Another incentive is, and this has nothing to do with money as such, but more public recognition, is when your, CEO, CXO publicly sort of compliment someone who has reported a real phish. That again, it rewards the desired behavior. And then on the flip side, if people keep on falling for phishing emails, and there is a small percentage of people who we call them the clickers, they keep on doing that. So they need sort of, apart from the remediation training and extra training, there might be disciplinary action that needs to be invoked. I'm always a bit against that, because I feel that we should rather look at why do they keep falling for that, and then really investigate what the reason is behind that. In certain cases, it could really be a personality trait, and then really support them with more training rather than penalizing them. But so those are sort of and then the other thing, if users aren't participating in your training campaigns, then that should be obviously reported to their line management. That's really it. In summary, if you wanted to improve your security culture in your organization, try and get executive support, involve them actively, measure it. So use like these security culture assessments or similar tools to get a view into where you are and where you want to get to. Work with your marketing and creative departments. Use relevant content that is personally relevant. Focus on fewer themes rather than overloading the users, and combine all of that with frequent phishing simulations. And then remember, it's a little bit like flossing. It's not something that we do once and then it's done. So it has to be continuously thought of and sort of brought to mind and kept up to date. And the good news is that and this is again like a research report that the Culture guys published just a few weeks ago, where they looked at companies that have a poor security culture versus a moderate or good security culture. And then they ran credential theft phishing simulations against the users in those companies. And what they found is that the users in a good security culture are 50 times less likely to share their credentials than the users are in the poorer security culture company. So it really shows that, and especially now where credential theft is sort of one of the number one threats, it's actually worse than ransomware even, with all of us sort of, consuming cloud applications and working from home. So account credentials is what the bad guys are after. So it's so important to ensure that our users know how not to give those away, and the fact that they are much less likely to do that if they're in a good security culture environment is sort of evidence that it really makes sense to invest in a positive security culture. And that's really it in terms of my talk. I believe that there's time for questions. But yeah, in terms of the key takeaways, I really feel strongly that we have to do more and work together on improving the security cultures on the continent. If you do, it will really significantly lower your risks in your organization. And it's not rocket science. Applying the right sort of levers, as I mentioned, those 5, 6, 7, or I think those 7 tips that I shared. And if you work with the right partner, and please, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter, then this can be done relatively simply and automated.